Welcome back to IADS Retail Park, the podcast from the International Association of Department Stores, where we look at what happens when legacy retail meets a very unforgiving future. Before we dive in, a quick disclosure. This podcast uses AI clone voices created with human oversight to ensure quality and accuracy. I'm Maya, and today we have a special guest, Christine, who wrote this week's exclusive on Macy's transformation from the world's largest store to what they're calling a leaner future. Christine, welcome back to the Retail Park.
Thanks for having me, Maya. I'm excited to dig into this with you because Macy's story really captures something bigger happening across the entire department store sector right now.
So let's start with the obvious question that's probably on everyone's mind. Macy's is closing 150 stores. That sounds like bad news, but you're arguing it's actually a strategic move. Walk us through that.
Yeah, I think the knee-jerk reaction is to see store closures as a decline, but what Macy's is doing is more nuanced than that. They're not just shutting down stores, they're simultaneously investing heavily in 350 locations they're calling their go-forward stores. The first wave of this strategy, the first 50 upgraded locations, has already delivered 3 consecutive quarters of comparable sales growth. We're talking about 1.9% growth in the third quarter of 2024, while the rest of the fleet is dragging down overall performance.
Okay, I see. So it's really about concentrating resources where they actually work rather than spreading them thin across hundreds of underperforming locations.
Yes, that's right, Maya. And this gets at something really important for anyone in retail leadership right now. Scale used to be the ultimate competitive advantage. You wanted to be everywhere, to have that coast to coast presence. Macy's had 853 stores at their peak in 2006 after that massive consolidation where they converted all these regional nameplates like Marshall Fields and Filene's to the Macy's brand. But today, not all scale is valuable scale. In fact, too much scale can become your biggest burden if you can't maintain quality and relevance across that entire footprint.
That's a pretty significant shift in thinking. Before we get into the current strategy, I want to go back a bit because your exclusive traces Macy's history all the way back to 1858. What struck me was how much Macy's actually pioneered in retail. Can you highlight some of those innovations?
Oh, absolutely. Macy's wasn't just a store, it was a retail laboratory. They introduced the one price system, which sounds basic now but was revolutionary at the time. Before that, prices were negotiable, which created all kinds of inefficiencies and inequities. They were the first to advertise prices in newspapers. They promoted Margaret Gatchell to an executive position in the 1860s, making her one of the first female executives in American retail. She actually came up with the idea of illuminated window displays to attract customers. And then there's the cultural piece. They introduced the in-store Santa Claus in 1861. And in 1924, they launched the Thanksgiving Day Parade, which became this massive cultural event completely separate from the store itself.
That's fascinating because it shows how Macy's built brand equity that transcended just selling products. They were creating cultural moments.
That's so true. And that's something that e-commerce platforms really struggle to replicate. You can't create a Thanksgiving Day Parade online. That kind of cultural capital is unique to physical retail when it's done right. But here's the thing, that cultural cachet alone isn't enough anymore. You need operational excellence, you need the right real estate, you need a clear value proposition for why someone should visit your store instead of just ordering online.
Why don't we go ahead and talk about some of the strategies Macy's tried to maintain that relevance? You spend quite a bit of time in the exclusive examining something called My Macy's. What was that about?
My Macy's was launched in 2008 and rolled out nationally in 2009. It was this ambitious attempt at what I call localization at scale. The idea was to empower 69 districts with regional merchants who could adjust about 10 to 15% of a store's inventory to match local tastes and demographics, while the core assortment was still controlled centrally. So you would have the same seasonal fashion statements and national categories everywhere, but stores in Florida could stock different sizes or styles than stores in Minnesota based on what actually sold in those markets.
Now, that does sound smart in theory, but what happened in practice?
It was kind of mixed, to be honest. Some markets saw real improvements in sell through and relevance. The top performing markets in 2009 were mostly my Macy's districts, but execution was uneven. You're adding organizational complexity by creating all these district level merchant teams, and the results really depended on the quality of local leadership. It required sophisticated inventory tracking and customer segmentation systems that were still being built out. By 2011, they introduced my Macy's 2 to try to refine it further, tying it more tightly to their emerging omnichannel capabilities. But ultimately, while it improved relevance, it couldn't overcome the bigger macro headwinds: mall traffic erosion, the rise of off price retailers, and the platforms eating into every category.
It sounds like it laid important groundwork, though, even if it didn't solve everything.
Right. And what's interesting is that the distributed decision making architecture and customer data systems they built for my Macy's became the foundation for their current omnichannel model. Today, uh, 33% of Macy's sales flow through digital channels, and they're using ship from store and buy online pickup in store extensively. That distributed inventory model wouldn't work without the systems they built during the My Macy's era. So even though the localization program itself was wound down, the infrastructure it created is still paying dividends.
Let's talk about the mid tier squeeze you mentioned in the exclusive, because that seems central to understanding Macy's challenges. What's happening to the middle market?
The middle market that Macy's built its entire business on is structurally shrinking. You've got off-price retailers like TJ Maxx and Ross, capturing value-conscious shoppers who are increasingly anxious about their economic future. You've got specialty stores like Sephora in beauty or Best Buy in electronics that have deeper assortments and more expertise in specific categories than a department store can offer. And then you've got platforms, Amazon, obviously, but also category specific platforms that are redefining what convenience means. Meanwhile, the American middle class itself is shrinking. Consumer spending is polarizing toward either extreme value or luxury, and Macy's sits right in that squeezed middle. That's why their diversification through Bloomingdale's on the upscale end and Bluemercury in the beauty specialist space is so important. It's a barbell strategy to reduce their exposure to that mid-tier erosion.
So, given all of this, what does Macy's need to prove moving forward?
Great question. Well, first, they need to show that the first 50 success can scale across all 350 upgraded locations. Early results are promising, but can they maintain that discipline and that level of investment across a much larger fleet? Second, they need to rebuild fashion authority. Department stores used to be where you went to see what was current, what was on trend. They've lost a lot of that authority to specialty stores and digital platforms, and getting it back in a squeezed mid-tier is really hard. Third, they need to grow digital beyond that 33% without eroding margins, because fulfillment costs can eat you alive if you're not careful. And finally, they need to prove that their transformation plan creates more value than the activist investors who wanted to do aggressive sale leasebacks to extract cash from the real estate. Macy's board ended those talks, betting that their strategy is the better path. Now they have to deliver on that.
So, tell me this, Christine. What's your take on whether they can pull this off?
Look, I think the strategy is sound. The early data from the first 50 shows that concentration can work. They're diversifying revenue beyond just merchandise, with the media network growing double digits and the digital marketplace expanding into new categories. But the structural headwinds are fierce. The mid-tier market is shrinking, mall traffic continues to decline, and they're competing against players with very different cost structures. I'd say the next 18 months are genuinely make or break. If the upgraded stores consistently outperform and they can get the fleet optimization done on schedule, they have a shot at being a smaller but healthier company. If execution stumbles or the market deteriorates faster than they can transform, it gets much harder.
Last question. What should other department stores around the world take away from Macy's experience?
I think the biggest lesson is that heritage and scale only matter if they're paired with decisive action and strategic clarity. You can't just coast on the fact that you've been around for 150 years or that you have stores in every city. You have to be brutally honest about which assets are working and which ones are dragging you down, and then you have to have the courage to concentrate resources where they'll actually drive returns. That might mean closing beloved locations. It might mean walking away from markets you've served for decades. But if you try to be everything to everyone everywhere, you'll end up being nothing to anyone. Macy's is betting that smaller can be stronger, and honestly, I think that's a bet a lot of department stores are going to have to make in the coming years.
Christine, thanks for walking us through these examples and turning what could feel abstract into something really tangible.
Thanks for having me, Maya. This was fun.
For everyone listening, I hope you all enjoyed Christine's take on Macy's. If you want the full breakdown, the numbers and case details behind what we've discussed, Christine's exclusive Macy's from the world's largest store to a leaner future, is available via the link in the episode description. To stay up to date and informed, follow us on LinkedIn at the International Association of Department Stores, explore our Substack, and visit our website for additional resources and reports. Until next time, keep innovating, keep adapting, and remember, in retail, standing still is moving backward.